And so I'll hand it off to him.
Thank you. I actually think it's a perfect segue to start with thinking about who our learners are as adults, and then beginning to think about what they want and why they're in school. Because I think that's another major difference, right, is that there's an intentionality behind adults returning to school that children don't have, when it's mandatory. You can make an argument that when they're in the jail and it just feels mandatory to them, that there may be this initial, I'm only doing this because you're asking me to do it, but there's still this kind of inherent forward thinking that comes with adult learners. That it's not just about what's happening in the classroom, but it's about what this is going to, the ticket that this will provide me to get access once I leave here. Okay, so I'm going to talk, I don't have much time, and there's a lot to be said about this, and so hopefully there'll be other opportunities as well. And I'm also, my email is here, and if you have any questions or want resources, I love research. I love seeing what the research says, seeing what the evidence says. I love looking at data. And so I have a lot of resources that I can also share with you if you're interested in kind of digging deeper on any of these things we're going to talk about. Okay. And so first off, I just wanted to start with a few quotes. These are actual quotes that I hear. This actual first quote is something I just heard at a conference that was all about career and college readiness. Our students are adults. When they go to college, they don't want to sit under an oak tree on college green to contemplate the meaning of life. I need the diploma so I can get this job and support my family. Not everyone is college material. You know what a GED stands for, right? Good enough diploma. I want to just let these sit for a minute and hear what you have to say. Anyone here have any sort of reaction to any one of these quotes? Anything, there's no right or wrong, not, yes?
The one that stands out, not everyone is college material.
Yeah.
When I was in teacher college, there's a woman who's Nellie Nodick, I believe her name was, and she started to, she wanted to start rethinking how we prepare our kids for life, and the fact that we sort of have become a society so focused on getting our kids to go to college, and the idea is not everyone wants to go to college, but yet we put this up as the highest, goal to attain. And so it really resonated with me because it seems to me that it's not an indication of how smart or how unsmart you are, but it really is about what you want to do with your life and really owning that and knowing that. And sometimes that doesn't lead to college. So that really started me thinking about, what am I telling my students at an elementary level? What sort of knowledge and real knowledge.
Thank you.
I think that one stood out to me as well, but it was more from I think the difference between college material and college readiness, and so like what it really means to be college ready versus college material, and the approach to the readiness of it. So how you use those things.
Yes.
The second one stands out to me. Sorry, I need the diploma so I can get this job and support my family. It really kind of shows a sense of urgency with their desire to get educated and the reasons why. It kind of goes along with the first one too. They don't want to get it because their parents are telling them to, or they just want to have this existential experience. They want to do it so they can, support people they care about.
Right. Right. And that's immediate material value. Yes.
Not everyone's college material again, and I guess I think back to my brother who has always kind of struggled with dependency issues, and then he got clean for a while, went to college, he was struggling, and instead of his professors helping him, they told him not everyone's college material, you're wasting your time. And so he dropped out, and not that it's their fault that he's using again, but I just feel like maybe if those professors would have taken the time to help rather than tell him that, then maybe his path would have been different at this point than what it is.
I'm going to get back to that in just a minute. A couple more. Yes.
I also think for some of these things, a lot of us, based on our culture and where we come from and how we were raised, for a lot of us, or for some of us, people actually fought and died for us to be able to have the opportunity to go to college and to be able to elevate and uplift out of what our ancestors fought for. So it's sometimes it's on an even more deeper level. There's a feeling of like we need to do this
Yeah.
because this is what people fought for us to do,
Right.
kind of like with voting.
Right. And one more. Please.
The first quote, the first quote, it seems very general to me. It seems to me that some adults might actually want to go to college, sit on a green, and fly. No, I mean, that has to be accounted for, right? I mean, we don't want to be too
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. If you let it percolate a little bit, I think you can start to feel some undercurrents of privilege, some undercurrents of equity, some undercurrents of, like, what does this really mean? It's not just, it's one thing to kind of say this to a very specific individual who maybe has a certain kind of background or they really, all they want to do is they want to be a mechanic and they've known this since the age of 5 and they know what all of their options are. But too often this is used as a cop-out. It's to take away options. It's to say, okay, now I don't have to worry about it because not everyone is college prepared. And too often, some of these, are used by our students who have become themselves kinds of victims of hearing this over and over again, and so they don't necessarily know what their options are. And so I think it's just important to really think about this. There's a lot of debate and a lot of real passionate arguments around some of these things. And I heard these throughout this conference. That was a fairly progressive conference from really progressive folks who were saying, we have to, get folks to come to City College or to community colleges. But, college isn't for everyone, and adults really don't. Our people don't want to sit on a college green, and, well, to your point, Rick, why not? I get to do that. I had the privilege of doing that. When I was between the age, a lot of us here, between the ages of 18 and 24, this sort of K youth, like that everyone is like, doesn't know what to do with this, like, this group population. I was living on a college campus. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and yet we expect an 18-year-old who is getting their GED to have a clear path in mind. And so I think it's just important to unpack some of this. So I wanted to start here just to kind of begin thinking about not just assumptions that other folks have, but assumptions that our students have about themselves as well. And so it's just as a way of a brief introduction to who I am and the department that I work in. So this is a fairly new department within 5 Keys. It's only been around for a few years. The bread and butter of 5 Keys is sort of has always been about a high school diploma, working with adults who are, the first 5 or 6 years I was actually a teacher with 5 Keys. I was hired in 2003 as one of the first teachers, and I worked in the women's jail for almost the entire 4 or 5 years. We at the time had about 6 teachers. We were operating in San Bruno. We were operating in County Jail 8 at the time, which was the women's jail, and then we had an Oak Grove site, so one community site that was really a sheriff's department location. We had no other community sites. Okay. Now we've grown to include, there are more students who are coming through community sites than there are through the jails, actually. At least those who are graduating. We had close to 80 graduates at our last community graduation, and we had how many in custody? Maybe 20 or so.
It's a little smaller.
Yeah.
But,
And so it's just kind of one that has to do with policies in San Francisco over time, where less folks are becoming incarcerated, but also just the need that exists within our community. And so we serve a wide range of students. A lot of them haven't been touched by the criminal justice system. And we're connecting increasingly to workforce development agencies throughout the community. And in fact, our charter, when it was written back in 2003, the exemption that allows us to pull down K through 12 funding from the state is connected to workforce development. It says that we will serve adults who are eligible for federal funding out of the Workforce Investment Act that Congress passed And if we serve these adults who are eligible for workforce funding, then that'll allow us to kind of count them as a K through 12 charter school. It's very unique to California that allows that funding to be used for adults who are over the age of 18 or 21. So we currently have contracts. These are money contracts, and so we do have funding from a couple of offices at the mayor's office, also with the Human Services Agency, which currently in San Francisco is the agency responsible for all of the welfare funding, all of the public assistance funding, the CalFresh or food stamps. We have additional funding that's private, that comes from the foundation, that's about supporting young adults who are part of public housing developments throughout the city. And then we have most recently these funding and that's related to helping our students prepare for and get into college. Okay, and so here's a department now that's not just about what's happening in the classroom as a high school, but really about how we're linking our students to opportunities outside of our classrooms. Okay, and so that's sort of the work that I represent, the folks that I work with. And so we have a number of sites within San Francisco that are co-located at workforce development agencies, and so students who take classes there, we want to encourage anyone who's teaching in the jail to let folks know there's usually a list of all the community classes, and when you get out, continue your education. It's not just about 5 keys, but also connecting to some of these workforce development opportunities so you can get job placement assistance, resume help, and a number of other services that our community partners provide. So the other thing in terms of, there's a real economic argument to why it's important for us to be thinking of our students as being college material, or at least have the opportunity to achieve some post-secondary credential. So it's not just about what's happening with us, but it's about preparing them for the next level. California, if you take, these are just simple facts. There's nothing magical about this. You could Google any of these. I got these from a report that came out in 2012 from California Competes called The Road Ahead, that a lot of folks now are kind of going back to talk about what can be called a skills gap or an achievement gap. It's the idea that we have jobs in a lot of different sectors in California, technology sectors, for example, and then related high service sectors as well. That's connected to the IT, construction and manufacturing and transportation and ports. There's a lot of economic growth in California. So if you take just the economic growth, we would be considered the 8th in the world, as our own economy if we were to kind of separate from the United States, which might not be a bad thing, because, depending on how the election goes. But that said, we rank 23rd, one of the lowest in terms of proportion of adults ages 25 to 64 with an associate's degree or above. And so, a lot of that has to do with, we have a very high immigrant population in California, but a lot of the jobs, needed to kind of fuel this economy, you require a post-secondary certificate, something higher than a high school diploma. And the gap that everyone who's a part of this world is talking about is that by 2025, we'll need an additional 2.3 million post-secondary credentials. And now those will come from somewhere. They'll come from out of state, they'll come from out of the country, they'll come from somewhere. Okay? But the question is, do we want them do we want our people to have access to these things? Okay? And so one of the most obvious suggestions or fixes to this problem is to increase high school completions. That if we were to close some of the racial and ethnic gaps, achievement gaps within not only high school but also community college completion, if we were to make it more accessible to English language learners, we could close this gap. Okay, and I think if you could also look up some of the racial and ethnic gaps related to achievement gaps related to both high school completion and college readiness. Right now there's an 18% gap between whites and African Americans who are considered college ready who enroll into college. Okay, there's also an even larger gap between English language learners. And so if we were to begin closing those and preparing more folks to enroll in community colleges, then we would be able to get closer to kind of, you know, preparing folks for these jobs that are here, but are only going to increase. Okay, so this is another national statistic: 65% of jobs by 2020 will require some post-secondary credential, yet only 46% of adult workforce has one right now. And so there is an urgency, not just in California, but nationwide, to think it's no longer a high school diploma in and of itself is no longer enough to compete in this economy. Any questions on this before I keep moving? One other thing, and if you're, and this could be a fun, you can look up the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They always have annual up-to-date statistics around earnings potential based on education. Okay, and so if nothing else, if you have a student who's like, I don't want to be here, what's this in it for me, I just need to make money, you can begin looking at what happens with the median weekly earnings if you have a high school diploma versus less than a high school diploma. But even more, you can see how earnings, you know, go up the more education. I mean, this is all until you get to a doctoral degree, and then they kind of get down. There is a tipping point. No offense to anyone here with a doctoral degree.
It's the student loan.
It is.
Yeah. Might make that more, right?
Right. Okay. Well, welcome to. Yeah. You just dip down a little bit there, but still, you know, you have a quality of life that's, you know, in a very low unemployment rate. It's still not as much.
Oh, believe me, I know what I'm
and this, you know, statistics or charts like this, and looking at if you're a math teacher, this could be a really fun activity with students to kind of play with these numbers a little bit. Ask them. You can actually do some, you know, predictions around how much do you think, how much more do you think you'd make. You could ask them to calculate what this means annually. Okay. Over time. There's nothing that surprising, I think, for us here, okay? But I do think it's important for our students, if you want to make education matter, and if they're coming to you with that, I only want a high school diploma for a job, then they kind of already get it. But we have a lot of adults who kind of, even in the community, my caseworker is asking me to come to school, okay? But really what I should be doing is working. And then I think you have a built-in argument here for how important it is. Yeah.
I think there's also a lower incarceration rate the higher the degree.
It's huge, actually. So Forward Change Consulting is a group that's based in Oakland, and they do this amazing work. We're going to try to get them out here to present to teachers on this. They focus on boys and men of color in their life course framework, and the high school diploma actually is the the single most predictive factor of whether or not you become incarcerated. There's a 47% decrease. As soon as a kid gets a high school diploma, they're 47% less likely to end up in prison by the time they're 30. That's huge. There's no other factor that has that much impact. And so, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And they would also say that it's never too late to achieve that. Like as soon as you get that high school diploma, you suddenly, you bump up, and then you have access to things you never had, including post-secondary. And then you have access to jobs you never had, and you're less likely to be caught up in
Lack
criminal
of
justice.
employment is the cause for this.
Right. The best way to stop a bullet is a job. So that was sort of an introduction in a sense, and I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these things. I don't have a lot of time. All of that was the sort of laying out, okay, what's the urgency of needing to kind of make sure we're helping and prepare our students not just to graduate, but to prepare for post-secondary success, okay? And so we are partnering with a group called Jobs for the Future, and this is partly through a grant, but also because they do amazing work in sort of helping especially adult education, or second chance programs like we may be called, with getting folks not just to graduate, but getting them ready for college and post-secondary credentials. And so Jobs for the Future developed a kind of a model that we'll be talking about, and I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, but the idea is this model has been used now, it's being used nationally for a number of different organizations that serve adults and young adults. And there's a lot of evidence now that those organizations, educational institutions that adhere to some of these best practices, the more best practices they adhere to, the more successful their students are in post-secondary success. Not just in graduating, but again, enrolling into college, enrolling into training programs, getting post-secondary credentials. And this kind of talks a little bit about some of the, a few examples nationwide. This is on your handouts, I don't need to read it to you. Youth Build USA, the CORE Network, some national organizations have also adopted this framework. This is a visual map, right? How it relates to 5 Keys though. So 5 Keys is, has been participating in a collaborative in San Francisco called Roadmap to Peace. And Jobs for the Future is one of the funders of this collaborative. And any students, and this funding actually targets 18 or 17 to 24-year-olds. So if you have a 17 to 24-year-old student who you would like to link them with Roadmap to Peace, they would have to continue, and they have to sign a letter of commitment if they're in jail to continue their 5 Keys education at one of our sites, and they would also need to enroll in case management and job prep services with one of the RTP partners. The intervention targets young men and now girls of color, and so it really is targeting Latino and African American men. But anybody who fits the demographic of 18 to 24, you should email me. Joanna also works closely on that. And if you're in jail, we can get them connected to one of our case managers who can come and interview them to see if they're eligible and to connect them with those resources. If you're in the community, look for this information as well to sign up your young adult students. Okay, so that's why we're connected to Jobs for the Future. That said, the idea though is that we can enhance all of our classes for all of our adults in preparing them for post-secondary success if we follow some of their suggested guidelines. Okay, their model is really 3 phases, although they all overlap. Okay, and so the idea is that you're setting high expectations as soon as they walk in the door. And of course, the immediate goal is to get a high school diploma or GED. But while you're doing that, you're providing enough supports and access for our students to begin to think about opportunities that maybe they hadn't thought about before. Okay, and what we're going to be doing is actually bringing in college and career skills increasingly into the classroom. And then once they get into college, we also have funding now to provide some first-year supports, and so that they can have assistance in navigating the community college system. Okay. The other statistic that is pretty disheartening for a lot of folks is that African American and Latino student populations in college, in community college level, have the lowest persistence rate, and so they enroll. And they either spend financial aid money on remedial classes and then they drop out so they can no longer afford it once the financial aid runs out, or they don't have their first generation college students. No one's ever showed them how to navigate the system. They've always been said you're not college material. They show up on a campus and there's no built-in supports on that campus to help them. And so we have funding now to provide some support. And actually Anna, who's here, and Joe, who's here, are going to be helping to lead that effort for 5 Keys. And so while they're with you as teachers during their, while they're working on their high school diploma or their GED, there are some key elements to kind of helping all students, okay? One is that, and I think, there's another handout that I'll give you at the end, okay, that kind of goes into more detail. But I think a few things that stand out to me is that this third point is something we can all do, we all must do, okay? That there's an aspirational culture that we relay to the message over and over and over again, that there's that all of our students are post-secondary material, okay? And whether that means community college, whether that means university, whether that means some sort of a credential, like a higher skilled credential, you know, for specific to the workforce. Everybody is post-secondary material. Okay. A lot of these things we're already doing. Okay. That one of their key elements is that it's individualized. Okay, and that's actually built in perfectly for our, you know, independent study model. That is very much every student gets their own map to graduation. It's very much individualized. And so we have a real opportunity for our teachers to begin working with our students. And it's not just about getting the diploma now. It's also about, okay, so we're going to work on that diploma, but also, are you planning for the next steps? And how are you planning for the next step? And holding the bar high for all of our students. No one should graduate. It's the whole idea of Common Core, right? That you really shouldn't graduate from high school unless you're college and career ready, okay? It's hard because our students come from, they may have all but 3 credits, and they may have had a really crappy education in the you know, when they were in their schools. And then it's like more pressure on us to not just get them to the finish line for the sake of graduating them, but it's really about making sure that they're ready to graduate. And that's where the sort of TABE testing, the assessments, you know, not just passing them through. Because that sends the same message as you're not college material does. And so I think it's having an aspirational culture, okay? And we're really working individually with our students to think about what their post-secondary plans are. There's a lot of materials here, and we'll be kind of tapping into these throughout the school year, okay? Including there's kind of a self-assessment that teachers will be doing, okay? That kind of asks our teachers and our staff to think about, are we creating this culture for post-secondary success? And I'll just leave you with this, and we don't have time to kind of answer these questions, but I'm going to hand out to you just to take with you some real practical approaches and elements around how to enhance instruction and delivery while students are in a high school or GED program to begin preparing them for post-secondary. And I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that exists within these. And there are others that you won't be able to do it alone. But a lot of it will require us to really look at our curriculum as a school to provide more support to teachers so that they can raise the bar and really think about not just around the high school standards, but are these standards connected to real economic opportunity for when the student graduates. But again, I think that everybody can adopt some of the best practices that are in here. Okay. I'm out of time, but you all have my email. Please do reach out if you want more information, and thank you for letting me ramble on a bit.
Thank you, George. So I'll pass out the form, and we'll have a break before the next session.
I have a question.
Yes.
That was mine as well. I kind of just an idea we want to incorporate into mine. Do we have any curriculum materials already in place for that? I know a lot about it, but I don't have
There's a lot.
What do you want?
something that you can get materials.
Right.
I'm talking about like the craft.
Anna and Joe.
Yeah, I think that is, there is, I think that's a piece that we need to develop more of.